Hey folks, Nick Culbertson here. In 1992, Todd McFarlane and his all-star band of misfit artists left Marvel and started their own comic book shop at Image Comics. They wanted to create and own their own characters and finally have the freedom to do comics their own way. Right out the gate, Image Comic Books was humongoid, and Todd McFarlane's creation Spawn led the charge. Over the years, Image Comics has seen its ups and downs. Different series have come and gone, but Spawn has remained constant. In 2019, Spawn crossed issue 301, becoming the longest-running character-owned comic in history. Yeah! But today, I want to talk about something that happened at Spawn's 20th anniversary. McFarlane caught readers totally by surprise when suddenly he started paying homage to classic covers within the Spawn series. The Spawn covers that started coming out were all parodies of other famous comic book covers. Comic book tribute covers have been around for a long time. The fans love them, and it's a way to pay respect to all those fantastic covers of the past. Todd McFarlane created a lot of iconic covers of his own during his time at Marvel, and many artists have paid tribute to those works as well. To see Todd McFarlane tackling these classic covers with Spawn at the helm, it was like going to see your favorite band and seeing them cover the best songs in history. Like Weezer covering Toto's Africa. Oh, that did happen. So whenever Weird Al Yankovic wants to release a parody song, he doesn't have to get permission for things like Eat It or Amish Paradise. Sometimes he would still ask for permission, but in the case of Amish Paradise, he didn't get permission from Coolio, and that didn't matter none. There are a few cases in copyright law where a creator can use someone else's copyright without permission or having to pay royalties. This can be for satire or parody, and another thing that you'll hear thrown around the internet a lot, fair use. Fair use is, hang on, let me Google that for you real quick here. In U.S. copyright law, fair use allows people to use someone else's copyright verbatim for teaching, criticism, news, or research without having permission from the copyright holder. Which is why I'm happy to bring you this news about Spawn covers that look like other covers. Right after the weather from Thomas. Ooh, it's gonna be a hot one today. Thank you, Thomas. So join me now as we take a look at these homage, tribute, parody, whatever you want to call them, covers of Spawn. And just to make it a little more fun, I'll first show you the Spawn cover and then see if you can guess what cover it is paying homage to. Homage. Let's get started. First, we have a couple of honorable mentions. This is Spawn issue 200, cover done by Jim Lee and McFarlane. The reason I'm not really including this in the group is that it's not a direct cover swipe like the other ones are, but Todd McFarlane did mention it on his website that it was paying homage to a cover done by Jim Lee previously, and it is this one, Batman issue 615. And as we'll see with Todd McFarlane and some of these other issues paying homage to himself, this is Jim Lee doing the same. This Batman cover uses a comic book trope of one leg showing with the other leg just going down to the knee and entirely disappearing. You're gonna have to pay extra if you want your artist to draw a second leg. Another thing I notice about this cover is how they are doing the gradient and coloring, and whenever we contrast that with the Spawn cover, you'll notice that they use this bloom effect where the light spills over the outlines all over the place. This is a really cool cover, and it's nice to see Jim Lee and McFarlane working together on something. Our other honorable mention comes outside of the Spawn series, and Spawn Kills Everyone 2, issue number 3. If you were collecting comics in the 90s, or even if you weren't, chances are you've seen this cover before. It is, of course, based on Infinity Gauntlet issue 1. Thanos there with the Infinity Gauntlet with all the Infinity Stones. And I love how it is just lit from the bottom and you can see how Thanos is emerging from the dark. When compared with the Spawn tribute, this one actually does feel like a parody. You have the clown being introduced as Clownos on the cover. And I do really like how they use the double outline around the glove to help it pop off the background. Alright, now on to our official comic book swipes, starting with issue number 8. It says in the signature, McFarlane after me, meaning he's copying himself on this cover, and this cover swipe comes from Spider-Man issue 1. This cover has been paid tribute to time and time again by several artists, first by McFarlane himself in Spider-Man issue number 13, and then by other artists on various covers. While some of them look like they were almost traced from the original, other ones like this Spider-Gwen cover, they sort of just take the pose and then they do it in their own style, which I really like. Instead of all the webbing that was on the Spider-Man cover, instead Spawn has all these chains all around him, and I love the rim light that they've put all around Spawn's body, especially on his right leg, how it's pink on one side and blue on the other. Then as you move to his arm in the middle, it has a green light on one side and a white highlight on the other side. It keeps your eye moving. I think Todd McFarlane would be proud of this homage. to himself. Next, we jump all the way to issue 220, and this is where the string of all these tribute covers began. In this cover, McFarlane is paying tribute to another Image artist, Rob Liefeld, with Youngblood issue number 1. This is a classic cover, and this issue sold like hotcakes. Hotcakes. I love all the poses of the characters ready to jump into action. It is so colorful, and you have an eclectic group of superheroes that make an awesome team. In the early Image days, they had characters like Spawn and Savage Dragon, but whenever they weren't just having one character in top billing, they had all these teams. They had Wildcats, Youngblood, Cyberforce, and one thing they all had in common were big muscles and tight clothing. The colors on the Spawn cover are quite muted in comparison, but I really like how he articulates all the detail of the characters in their black costumes using white highlights for the line work. And we'll see that even more in these covers coming up. So this next one also comes from Spawn issue 220. They actually had multiple variant covers for this. And in this cover, you can see Spawn shooting off the cover of the comic book. And this is, of course, in paying tribute to issue number 1 of the Savage Dragon. Nobody draws a fist quite like Eric Larson does. Just so beefy. And this use of foreshortening in this cover really makes it feel dynamic, from his tiny little foot there in the background in all of the visual planes that we see on our way, working our way forward, from his back fist to his face to the knee, and then to his giant balled up fist in the front. Again, this is a very colorful cover, and then whenever we contrast that with the Spawn cover, you'll notice that Spawn himself is dark, but they're using bloom lighting to light everything around him. His eyes are exploding with lightning bolts, and the glow all around him just makes it seem like there's some kind of fire or energy eclipsing the entire scene. If you take a closer look at his fist, you'll see how his costume is black, and it has all these little highlighted, colorful lines around it. This is something that McFarlane was first doing with Spider-Man whenever he had him in the black costume, and then later on with Venom. And that technique of highlighting the character by using lighter line work on their costume has been a staple of Spawn throughout. Next, we move to Spawn issue 221. Here we see Spawn flying through the air in an homage cover that no doubt you will recognize. That is, of course, Amazing Fantasy issue number 15, the first appearance of Spider-Man. This comic book is one of the most valuable comic books in history, and as such, it has been paid homage to several times before. It's also nice just to see McFarlane tackling a Spider-Man cover that is not one from his era. Next, we move to Spawn issue 222. Here we have Trimmer hovering over Spawn. This is another time when McFarlane is paying homage to himself. It even says in the signature, McFarlane parody of Todd. And the cover it's paying tribute to, of course, is the Amazing Spider-Man issue 316. And here you can see Todd McFarlane highlighting the character in the dark suit using those lighter lines. He actually uses this in the darker part of the Spider-Man suit too, but it's more pronounced on Venom, where you can see his entire hand is completely outlined in those blue lines. And those blue lines also become a thicker highlight on the top of the character. The amount of details on the character is also way ramped up in the Spawn cover. Just the level of detail in the shading, but also the number of actual line strokes that are done on the characters. Next, we move on to Spawn issue 223, Spawn of the Dead. This cover is paying tribute to a comic book series that brought Image back onto the map, and that is, of course, The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead has been a smash hit, in large part because of the TV series, and also in large part because it's freaking awesome. If you haven't checked them out, look for the Walking Dead compendiums. I binge these comic books the way that you would binge the show on Netflix. And they're so good. It's like every time you turn a page, you never know what's going to happen. The way they develop characters and the tension and release of the storytelling, it's just the best comic book series I've ever read. And it also has zombies. I like in the Spawn tribute how he keeps the face reflections in the broken glass in the back. You can see the clown over there in the right, and Spawn standing there looking like a stoic bad butt with his chin jutted out, his feet planted on the ground, and his cape flying all over the place. Must have been really windy that day. Next, we have Spawn issue 224. Here we see Spawn all crunched up in a little ball in an art style that is very pulpy. It almost looks like it was drawn with a ballpoint pen, and this, of course, is paying homage to Batman Dark Knight Triumphant Book 2. If you've not seen this cover before, it looks like a fine art piece. Batman fills up the entire cover almost like he's been shoved into a box, and you can see he's gotten his butt whooped, but he keeps coming back for more. In other covers, we see things like a hand coming towards you for foreshortening, but in this cover, it's almost like the entire thing is foreshortened. The Spawn cover has a higher level of polish while still giving tribute to the original by Frank Miller. This is definitely one of those covers that sticks with you. Next, we have Spawn issue 225, Obama Wins. There was also a variant that said Romney Wins up in the corner. In later years, some Image artists would have more of a commentary on what was happening politically and socially, but this one's pretty neutral since it was for both presidential candidates. It's kind of like when the World Series happens and they make t-shirts for both teams. Cubs win! On this cover, we see a little Spawn button with some blood glistening on it, and this, of course, is paying tribute to the Watchmen cover. The Watchmen cover juxtaposes the blood dripping down and the Have a Nice Day smiley face on it. The perspective is totally zoomed up, so you don't know exactly what's happening, but it's something involving a happy face, pin, and blood. The Spawn cover has a little bit more realism to it, and it's much darker, and the blood has a much more viscous quality to it. Next, we move on to Spawn issue 226. On this cover, we see the clown holding up some knives with Spawn rushing at him, both characters displaying full intensity at what looks like a moment right before impact. And this cover, of course, is paying tribute to another Todd McFarlane cover, one that comes all the way back from Hulk 340. This is one of McFarlane's earlier covers, and it is my favorite. I was going to say it's one of my favorite, but I'm going to go ahead and say this is my favorite cover. Wolverine is so intense here, and both of their faces are looking away in the reflection, even though they're about to smash together. I'm trying to cultivate a little bit of minimalism in my life, but I want this comic book. I want it. The value of this comic book has gone up over the years, so if you want the cover, maybe you can get this Spawn cover, but it's actually gone up in value as well. So maybe we can just print off a JPEG and hang that up instead. You can tell from the Spawn cover that there is a lot more details in the line work, whereas you can really tell that he took his time on the clown and on those fingers. There's shading both happening with the lighting gradients and in the cross hatching. All in all, a great tribute to a great cover. Next, we're on to Spawn issue 227. Of course, seeing this pose, he looks like Spider-Man here. You can tell it's paying homage to Spider-Man, but do you know which Spider-Man issue it is? Well, I'm going to tell you right now. It's Amazing Spider-Man issue number 300. In this cover by McFarlane, you see Spider-Man with all kinds of angles being twisted, with the foreshortening of the hand all the way in the front, the foot by his face, and he's wearing the black suit, which requires doing those light blue lines to outline the silhouette of the character where the costume is overlapping. One of McFarlane's signature things that he did with Spider-Man was this very intricate, detailed webbing. If you contrast that with the Spawn cover, you will see that McFarlane is still doing things the hard way, except instead of using the very detailed web, now he is using a very detailed chain instead. We're now seeing a trend where each of these tribute covers are way more detailed than the original ones. It's either that his style has evolved over time to become more detailed, or he has more time to spend on his own creation. It really comes down to your personal preference whether you like the simple version or these more highly rendered ones, but I like them both. So let's move on. We're actually going to see this cover paid homage to one more time, but we ain't there yet, brother. Next, we see Spawn issue 228, where you see Spawn lifting up a car and smashing it into a rock. This cover, of course, paying homage to Action Comics #1. You can see Superman slamming this car into a rock. This comic book is probably worth more than that car, and I love this guy down here in the front cover that seems totally upset about something other than what's happening in the scene. Wait. Oh my god, I left the garage open. One big difference on the Spawn cover is you can see that it's all bloodied up on the windshield. The characters that were surrounding the action are all gone, and the details, the line work, and the shading are all turned up to 11. This one goes to 11. Next, we move to Spawn 229, and in this cover, you can see Spawn is holding up the word Spawn. His body is totally perpendicular to where we're viewing. You can see he's completely doubled over on himself, with his head actually tipping to the ground. This is, of course, paying homage to Hulk King Size Special #1 by Steranko. This cover is totally iconic. I love all the colors to it. You get to see the Hulk in a strong pose, and the way each limb is independently working, it keeps your eye moving around the whole picture. It's cool to see a beefed up Spawn in this cover. You know, compared to the other ones, he has put Spawn in the pose of Spider-Man before, and now he's as the biggest bad boy of Hulk. His arm is just gigantic up there on the top of the page, and the details of the muscling are accentuated on the torso by using dark lines, and then whenever we come down to the leg, he's actually using lighter lines on the black costume to show all the various forms. This one is really cool. Next, we move on to Spawn issue 230, and in this cover, you can see his cape flying all over the place with the moon silhouette there in the background. This cover, of course, paying homage to a McFarlane cover I found out about much later, Batman issue 423. The details of the cape and all the bats in the background with the moon. This is another one of those comic books that you just hang on your wall like a piece of art. I love the contrast of the colors of the cape and how it pops off the background. On the Spawn cover, we can see that the line work is a little bit more detailed, especially on the cliff he's standing on, but it still maintains that whimsical feel with the cape flying everywhere, looking like it's rigid in some places and free-flowing in others. Next, we move on to Spawn issue 231, and this one, Todd McFarlane parodying himself again. This is the same pose that he did in Spawn number 8, which pays tribute to Spider-Man issue number 1. I like on this cover how he's returned to having that lime green color in the background. It's a real nice contrast to Spawn and his costume and helps him pop off the background. Once again, McFarlane has substituted that complicated webbing for an even more complicated chains. I like how the ones coming directly off of him look really thick, but the ones in the background are super tiny. And while I enjoy looking at those, I also just see the mountain of work that went into rendering those. Spawn's cape and all the spikes on him make him feel like more of a bad butt. At this point in the series, Spawn's look has evolved with all the spikes on his costume. When we compare this Spawn cover to Spawn issue 8, you can see how Spawn has evolved over the years. The character's design still looks the same, but the way it is rendered has totally changed over the years. In issue 231, you can see it's a much more gritty look. It feels like more lines are drawn to give detail. The strokes seem loose but sure. They're like sure loose strokes. And I've noticed this with Jim Lee before too. If you watch Jim Lee just draw something now, he draws amazing pieces, but he's also very fast. And I imagine that's the same way that McFarlane has progressed over the years, where now he could probably bang out one of these covers in his sleep. This issue concluded his run of tribute covers, but then he picked it back up with Spawn issue 298. In this cover, we can see Spawn flying through the air. He looks like he's rendered in a more cartoony style, of course paying tribute to something in an earlier comic, and that cover is Amazing Spider-Man 298. So now you can see the numbers of the Amazing Spider-Man and Spawn have synced up. On this cover, you can see Spider-Man is in his black costume, and one thing to note, once again, is that detailed webbing that's shooting at the camera. With Spawn, instead of him shooting out a web, you can see these green power blasts coming out, and in place of the webs, we have those chains once again flying towards the camera. I say camera, there's no camera, but if there were a cameraman, he would need to look out for those chains. Next, we move on to Spawn issue 299. I love how McFarlane has drawn all these awesome looking characters there on the bottom. They're all in muted pastel colors, either green or purple or blue. And this cover, of course, is paying homage to another McFarlane cover for Amazing Spider-Man 299. Although these army men on the bottom are not the focal point, the way that their faces are rendered and their hands, you can just tell it's done by Todd McFarlane. He couldn't resist the urge to draw really complicated webbing once again, and Spider-Man is in a dynamic pose with his fist all the way between his legs. In addition to paying tribute to the main cover, he's also paid tribute to the little pictures in the corner. Now we have Spawn in the corner on the road to 300 and the black and white headshot down in the corner. Next we have Spawn issue 300. This is where they tied the record for the longest running creator-owned comic book series. This of course being the same cover we saw for issue 227, only Spawn is now wearing fewer spikes. And once again, this cover is paying tribute to Amazing Spider-Man issue 300. And this brings us to our final issue for this video, Spawn 301, the record-breaking issue. This is a variation on the previous cover, just like was made for Amazing Spider-Man 301. When comparing the two covers, you can see the evolution of Todd McFarlane over the years. His line work has become more detailed, and it's just awesome to see an artist that was a huge success with Marvel go off on their own and follow their passion all the way up to this record-breaking issue. When McFarlane started paying tribute to those classic covers, I don't think anyone saw it coming, but we're all fortunate that he did, because it lets us look at all these classics from a new perspective. And that wraps up our news on Spawn covers. Back over to you, Nick.
And that's it. Ain't you glad you clicked on the video, Sonny?
Thanks for watching the video, folks. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if any of these covers really tickled your fancy. My fancy was very tickled. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you comic readers next time.